Ted Cruz entered the Senate hearing room expecting a fight. The Democratic senators believed they would humiliate him live on national television. But within minutes, the mood shifted, and a single calm sentence turned the entire chamber upside down. By the end, the audience was applauding, and his opponents were left speechless. Before we dive in, let us know where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these moments. They thought they had Ted cornered. Senator Elizabeth Warren and her Democratic colleagues were ready for battle. That morning's session was billed as an open policy debate with Senator Cruz, but everyone knew the real agenda: a public takedown. Cruz entered the chamber with a calm, wry smile, nodded to the public gallery, and sat across from Senator Warren, Senator Cory Booker, and Senator Amy Klobuchar. The tension was tangible, electric, almost theatrical. From the moment Senator Warren leaned in for her first question, it was obvious this wasn't going to be a polite exchange. It was an ambush. "So, Senator Cruz," Warren began, her voice laced with sharp sarcasm, "you've been very vocal lately in your support for a 100% tariff on foreign goods. Do you really believe economic nationalism and trade barriers are the answer now?" The crowd in the gallery chuckled nervously. The cameras zoomed in on Cruz. Unfazed, he leaned forward and replied calmly, "Supporting American workers isn't isolationism, it's survival." There was a pause, a long one. Senator Booker jumped in, raising his voice. "You say you're protecting jobs, but isn't this just another way to push a mega agenda? Why now? Why are you?" Cruz turned to him, steady and measured. "Because I've seen what happens when America sells out its own people. I've served in this chamber for years, and every time we stop investing in our own workers, our own communities, we become dependent on markets that don't care about our future." The crowd shifted. Some nodded, a few clapped quietly. Senator Klobuchar narrowed her eyes. "You talk about American values, Ted, but let's be honest. You have a history, a controversial one. Divisive statements, partisan attacks. Are we supposed to take you seriously now, just because you're waving the flag?" The jab was sharp. The room went quiet. Cruz paused. He didn't flinch, didn't get defensive. "I've made mistakes, big ones, and I've paid for them, but the fact that I'm here today means something. I chose to face it, and I'll keep facing it if it means I can help fix what's broken." There was silence, then a single clap, then another. The mood in the room began to shift. Senator Warren tried to regain control. "But tariffs don't fix character, Ted. You talk about building economic walls, but what about the walls you've built in your own politics?" That's when it happened. Cruz leaned in, voice steady and low. "You don't tear down walls by shouting at people. You tear them down by listening, even to those you disagree with." The entire room froze. No one expected that from him. In that moment, the narrative began to fracture. The Democrats had planned a storm, but they forgot. Ted Cruz doesn't run from lightning. By the second round of questioning, it was clear the panel was recalibrating. The teleprompters might have still read policy discussion, but the energy in the chamber was anything but ordinary. Warren shuffled her notes. Klobuchar whispered to Booker. The cameras kept rolling. Ted Cruz sat quietly, almost still, his fingers tapping the table. That calmness rattled them more than any display of anger ever could. "So let's talk economics," Warren said, her tone sharper now. "You really think imposing a 100% tariff on foreign goods is going to help American jobs? Isn't that just going to start a trade war and make life more expensive for everyone?" Cruz nodded slowly, as if she had just asked the most reasonable question in the world. Ted Cruz leaned in, addressing the panel and the packed public gallery. "I understand, tariffs sound aggressive, but you know what's more aggressive? The way we've let our manufacturing, our supply chains, even our tech sectors ship jobs overseas, chase cheaper labor, and gut American towns just to pad corporate profits." He looked over at the crowd, his tone steady. "We're not competing anymore. We're being undercut, and if we don't draw a line somewhere, Main Street America turns into a ghost town." A few audience members clapped. Someone in the back cheered. The cameras didn't pan to the reaction, but you could feel the producers tense up behind the scenes. Senator Booker leaned forward. But that's not how capitalism works, Ted. If American companies can't compete globally, maybe we're just not providing enough value. Isn't that the market speaking? Cruz's jaw tightened slightly. You know what else capitalism needs to work? Fairness, a grip on reality. Right now, it's not competition. It's a race to the bottom. And it's American workers who are falling first. Senator Klobuchar jumped in, trying to reframe the debate. That sounds like something the unions would say. Cruz shot back without hesitation. I'm fine with that, because the guy working the late shift at the auto plant in Ohio, or the woman driving a delivery truck in Texas, they're not cashing in stock options. They're trying to keep a roof over their heads. There was another pause. Some in the gallery clapped again. Then Senator Warren pulled out a printout and slid it across the table. This is from your last press interview. You said, and I quote, "America should stop pretending globalism is the answer to everything." Is that really your position? Cruz didn't even glance at the paper. He looked directly at Warren. Yes. Isn't that just isolationism? She pressed. No, he replied firmly. It's prioritizing what's real. We've let globalism become a mask for exploiting our own workers, our own communities, our trust. I'm not saying we shut the world out. I'm saying we stop selling ourselves short. His words hung in the air. For a moment, no one responded. Senator Booker broke the silence. You're turning this into some kind of populist crusade. Cruz leaned forward, calm but unshakable. No, I'm reminding people that they deserve better. The energy shifted, not completely, but noticeably. The next thing Warren said came out just a bit softer. We'll take a quick recess. As the camera panned out and the committee went into a short break, you could see it in the senators' faces. This wasn't going the way they'd planned, and they were running out of ways to stop it. The mood in the room had changed. Staffers whispered hurriedly, aides signaled for more applause, but it didn't matter. Something real had shifted. Ted Cruz wasn't just defending policy anymore. He was defending presence, and the panel could feel the control slipping. When the hearing resumed, Senator Klobuchar wasted no time. Let's not pretend the past doesn't matter, Senator Cruz. There are a lot of people who think you shouldn't even have a platform here. You've said things, hurtful, offensive things. Are we just supposed to forget that because you made a few good points today? The air grew heavy. Cruz drew a slow breath, looked straight ahead. I don't want anyone to forget, he said, voice steady. For a long time, I was angry, reckless. I said things I shouldn't have, and there's no excuse for that. I've apologized, but I don't get to demand forgiveness. A few people in the gallery nodded quietly. I came here knowing you'd bring it up, and you should. Growth doesn't come from hiding the past. It comes from dragging it into the light and asking yourself if you're still the same person. The room was quiet, not with discomfort, but curiosity. Senator Warren tried to recover the momentum. But how do we know this isn't just a rebrand, a comeback attempt? Cruz gave a faint smile. You don't. You can't. But if I was just chasing applause, Cruz continued, I wouldn't be sitting here right now talking about tariffs and the decline of American industry. I'd be out fundraising or cutting campaign ads. That line landed. Even Senator Warren allowed herself a reluctant smile. But Senator Booker pressed on. You say you've changed, Ted, but this tough guy, flag-waving routine, it sounds like the same old Cruz, just with a different suit. That was the moment. Ted Cruz leaned in, calm but unwavering. I don't think it's tough to want your country to stand on its own 2 feet. I think it's responsible. And I don't think it's nationalism to love the place that raised you and want to make it better for everyone. He paused, then added quietly, we've gotten so scared of being called names that we forgot how to stand for something real. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, applause. Louder this time, longer, more genuine. The audience wasn't applauding perfection. They were responding to something else. Sincerity. Whether they agreed with Cruz or not, they were listening, and that made all the difference. Senator Warren glanced at her notes, hesitating. Let's shift to the tech sector, she said. But Cruz interrupted gently. We are talking about tech. about industry, about the soul of America. Warren raised an eyebrow. Cruz continued, when your industries start treating people like statistics, when all that matters is overseas profits, when open dialogue gets labeled dangerous, that's not progress. That's control. And every American should be concerned about that. No one interrupted. No one followed up. Even the committee chair didn't signal to move on. No one expected Cruz to be the one talking about control. Certainly not like this. As the camera pulled back for a brief recess, the senators' faces told the story. Ted Cruz wasn't just answering questions. He was taking back the microphone. By the time the third round of questioning began, everyone knew this wasn't going according to the Democrats' plan. Social media was exploding. Half the live tweets praised Cruz's candor. The other half accused the Senate of losing control of its own hearing. None of that tension showed on the broadcast. Warren returned with a forced smile, switching topics. You've criticized the tech industry for turning its back on American workers, but haven't you benefited more from Silicon Valley than most politicians? Cruz leaned back, almost relaxed. I have, and that's exactly why I'm speaking out. Because I've seen what happens behind the scenes, the way priorities shift, the way innovation becomes propaganda, the way merit gets pushed aside for politics. Booker chimed in, so you think American industry is broken? No, Cruz said. I think it's scared. Klobuchar tilted her head. Scared of what? Cruz didn't hesitate. Scared of being irrelevant, scared of honesty, scared of the very people they claim to represent. A quiet murmur swept through the gallery. Someone up front clapped softly. Cruz leaned forward. We used to build companies and institutions that challenged power, that asked hard questions. Now you challenge anything and you're labeled toxic, dangerous, outdated. He looked across the panel. I've been called all those things, but what I won't be is silent. Warren tried again, but isn't some of this just accountability? The world's changed. People expect more now. I'm not against accountability, Cruz replied. I'm against selective accountability. We act like redemption is off the table, but only for certain people. You either believe in second chances or you don't. You can't sell forgiveness and cancel it at the same time, Cruz said, his voice unwavering. That landed hard. Even Senator Warren's expression faltered for a second. That's when Senator Klobuchar, sensing an opening, pressed him. Isn't it a little convenient, Senator Cruz, to be saying all this now when you've got nothing left to lose? Cruz didn't blink. You're right, I've lost a lot. My reputation, opportunities, friends. But what I haven't lost is my voice. He let the words hang for a moment. And that's what makes people nervous. The gallery erupted, louder than before. Applause, a few whistles, even some cheers echoed through the chamber. For the first time, the panel of senators looked genuinely shaken. Not because Cruz had said something outrageous, but because he hadn't. He was calm, measured, honest. And worst of all for them, he was being heard. Senator Warren called for a short recess with a tight smile. We'll return after the break. But everyone watching knew the real moment had already arrived. When the hearing resumed, the energy in the room had shifted. The public, who had come expecting a spectacle, now leaned forward, arms crossed, brows furrowed, not out of anger, but out of genuine interest. You could feel it. Something rare was happening. Warren, clearly thrown off, tried to steer the conversation away from policy. Let's step away from politics for a moment, Senator Cruz. Let's talk about your career. You've had public highs and some very public lows. Why come back now? Cruz looked around the room, then fixed his gaze on her. Because we don't have time to wait anymore. This industry, this country, it's at a breaking point. And if those who know the inside don't speak up, who will? A beat. The gallery murmured again. Senator Booker cut in. Are you saying America is collapsing? Isn't that a little dramatic? Cruz turned toward him, steady. Not collapsing, evolving into something it was never meant to be. This used to be a place for honest debate, for real problem solving. Now it's a place for slogans, and when everything becomes a message, nobody hears the truth anymore. Senator Warren looked up sharply. So what's your truth, Senator Cruz? He didn't miss a beat. That every worker, every citizen, Every American should be able to create, speak, disagree without being exiled for it. Free speech doesn't end just because someone gets uncomfortable. Patriotism isn't hate, and love of country isn't extremism. Applause, this time real, spontaneous. Even Warren looked surprised. Cruz continued, "They say we need more diversity in America. Fine. Start with diversity of thought. I've worked with people of every background, every belief. But you know what gets silenced the fastest? An opinion that doesn't fit the narrative." Now the gallery was nodding. People uncrossed their arms. Some held up phones to record. Senator Klobuchar crossed her arms. "And what about your own narrative? What about the damage from your past words, your past actions?" Cruz nodded. "I live with it every day, and I should. But growth isn't proven by hiding. It's proven by showing up and speaking, even when people still doubt you." He glanced out at the audience. "If I came here to be liked, I'd have said something safe. But I didn't. I came here because it matters, because what we say in rooms like this ripples beyond these walls." Silence, then more applause. A few people stood up. Warren half joked, raising her hands. Okay, we get it. Ted Cruz is trending." That got a few laughs, but the tension in the room had cracked. The gallery had turned, not against the Senate, but towards something else, something real. And the senators knew it. The next segment was coming fast, and aides were scrambling to change the tone. But the momentum, it belonged to Cruz now. The committee staff didn't want a repeat of the last round, but by now things were out of their hands. They tried shifting topics, softening the tone, even calling a break early. None of it worked. Ted Cruz was controlling the tempo, and worse for them, he wasn't doing it with anger or showmanship. He was doing it with composure. The next segment began with Senator Warren trying to calm things down. "Senator Cruz, we've talked politics, the economy, the past," she said with a measured smile. "Let's talk about solutions. What do you think America really needs right now?" Cruz didn't hesitate. "Truth," he said, "even when it's ugly, especially when it's ugly." The room went quiet. Right now, we're more afraid of offending each other than we are of lying to each other. That's the problem. We don't need safer spaces. We need braver conversations. A few people in the gallery applauded, then more joined in. Senator Klobuchar leaned forward, trying to shift back to safer ground. But conversations without accountability just become noise. Shouldn't there be consequences for speech that hurts people? Absolutely, Cruz replied. But there is a difference between hurting someone and simply disagreeing with them. We've lost that distinction. We've made discomfort a crime. He paused, then added quietly, and we've convinced ourselves that only one side gets to define what's offensive. There it was, the line. At first, the words landed quietly, like a door closing in the background. But the effect was instant. Warren blinked. Booker sat back, Klobuchar's mouth parted as if she was about to respond, but didn't. The audience seemed to be holding their breath. These weren't words shouted in anger. They weren't even loud. But they struck home because they didn't just challenge the panel, they challenged the entire chamber. For a moment, no one had a comeback. Cruz let the silence linger. "I'm not here to win anyone over," he said. "I'm here to say what's true, and if we can't do that without fear, then we've already lost." That's when it happened. Someone from the gallery shouted, "Let him speak." Applause followed, then cheering. The senators tried to keep smiling, to brush it off, but something fundamental had broken loose. The script they had planned was gone. Now they were the ones reacting, and Cruz was leading. When the next break came, nobody in the room moved. No one wanted to miss what came next. After the break, the hearing room looked the same, but it wasn't. Not anymore. The camera panned the panel, but something in their demeanor had shifted. Their postures were stiffer, their smiles tighter, the energy different. And Ted Cruz, still steady, still calm, now had an edge to him, as if he knew this was the moment everything had been building toward. Senator Klobuchar jumped in first, pushing harder now. "You say you're here to speak truth," she said, her voice rising slightly. "But let's be honest, Senator, when you speak, you divide people. You're not some unifier, you're a symbol of outrage, of controversy for the far right. Cruz nodded slowly. I can't control what people project onto me, but I can control what I say. And when I see a country tearing itself apart over sound bites and slogans, I'm going to speak up, no matter who it upsets. Senator Booker followed fast, tone sharp. And what about when your words do the damage? Then I take responsibility, Cruz replied. But responsibility means standing here, owning it, facing it, not disappearing. He looked directly at Senator Booker. I'm here. Where are the others? That landed. Suddenly, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been silenced, blacklisted, pushed out. Not because of crimes, but because of their ideas. Senator Warren exhaled slowly. Her voice was quieter now. You know, Senator Cruz, a lot of people at home think you're just doing this for a political comeback. Cruz didn't smile. I don't need a comeback. I need a country that hasn't forgotten how to forgive. The chamber fell silent. Cameras tightened on Senator Klobuchar, who blinked. You could see it in her eyes. The line wasn't flashy, but it cut deep. Cruz looked out at the gallery. You don't have to like me, but if you think canceling every flawed person will make the world better, you're not helping. You're hiding. A slow clap began. One person, then two, then a dozen. Soon the hearing room was filled with applause, louder than at any previous moment. The senators exchanged glances. They were no longer in control. The public had chosen, and it wasn't the panel's side. Cruz sat back. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He just let the noise wash over him. Because he knew the moment they tried to make him the villain, he became something else. As the final break ended, staffers scrambled behind the scenes, shuffling closing questions, whispering in earpieces, urging the panel to wrap up quickly and move on. But you can't move on from a moment that shakes the room. You can only brace for what comes next. Senator Warren tried to reclaim the spotlight. Well, Senator Cruz, it's certainly been eventful, she said with a tight smile. Before we adjourn, anything you'd like to leave with the public? Cruz nodded slowly. Yes. Don't let the loudest voices in the room decide what you're allowed to think. Don't hand over your voice to those who claim to speak for you, left or right, here or in Washington, because once you give it away, you don't get it back. It wasn't grandstanding. It wasn't a performance. It was a warning. Senator Klobuchar jumped in, trying to lighten the mood. Well, thank you for joining us, Senator Cruz. We appreciate your candor. Or maybe thanks for surviving the firestorm we meant to burn you in. But Cruz didn't rise just yet. He looked straight at the senators. I know why I was invited here. You thought you'd teach me a lesson. Remind me I don't belong. He looked at the audience. But here's the thing. I don't need to belong to be right. Then he stood. A few people in the gallery stood too. Then more. Applause again, louder, sharper, no longer polite. The cameras caught Senator Warren glancing off stage. A silent look that said, what just happened? Because this wasn't how the hearing was supposed to end. The panel was no longer in control. Ted Cruz didn't just walk out of the hearing. He left behind a chamber in ideological, emotional, and reputational chaos. As the session ended and the hall emptied, the panel tried to smile through it, but they looked shell-shocked. The energy was off. You could feel it in the stiffness of their laughter, in the way they shuffled papers that suddenly didn't matter. And online, it had already begun. Clips, hashtags, headlines. Ted Cruz turns the Senate upside down, the moment the crowd turned. One sentence that shut down the panel. The hearing had been built for confrontation, but no one expected to lose control. The broadcast may have ended, but the real story was just beginning. Within minutes, clips from the session flooded social media. Short, punchy segments. Cruz calmly responding to Booker, Cruz challenging Warren's definition of patriotism, Cruz standing as the crowd rose with him. It wasn't just trending, it was erupting. On Twitter, voices from both sides of the political spectrum weighed in. Some hailed him as a truth-teller, a rare voice with the guts to show up and speak out when it would have been easier to stay silent. Others called it a PR stunt, an act of calculated provocation delivered in a calm tone and carefully measured words. But one thing was undeniable. No one was talking about the committee's message. They were talking about his. By mid-afternoon, major media outlets had already run with headlines. Ted Cruz hijacks the Senate hearing and wins the crowd. Viewers shocked by Cruz's composure, senators left speechless. Is Congress ready for real debate? Back at the Capitol, the fallout was already setting in. Staff huddled over video footage, debating what to post officially and what to quietly leave out. Interns were tasked with monitoring comment sections, most of which leaned overwhelmingly in Cruz's favor. A leaked email from one aide to another said it plainly. We brought him in thinking we'd frame him. Instead, he reframed us. Behind the scenes, Warren was reportedly frustrated, not because she disagreed with Cruz, she always had, but because he never cracked. They threw everything at him, personal history, moral questions, political accusations, and he didn't stumble once. Booker left quietly, no post-hearing tweet, no comment to the press. Even Klobuchar, usually the calm center, reportedly muttered to a staffer, he didn't take the bait. That's what unsettled them. Meanwhile, Cruz was gone. No follow-up interview, no press conference, no tweet storm, just silence. He'd said his piece, he didn't need to repeat it, and that silence made everything louder. By nightfall, even late-night shows were referencing it. Some mocked Cruz, some mocked the panel, but even in the jokes, the moment lived on. It had legs, it had weight. Most importantly, it had people thinking. The committee had invited him in to corner him. Instead, he walked out, leaving them cornered by their own assumptions. The next morning, headlines kept pouring in. Every major outlet picked up the story. Clips from the hearing amassed millions of views overnight. Commentators from across the political spectrum dissected each exchange like it was a courtroom drama. But everyone kept coming back to one line, the one that wouldn't fade. We've convinced ourselves that only one side gets to define what's offensive. It echoed on every platform, quoted by both supporters and critics. Not because it was practical, but because it was true. And deep down, everyone knew it. Even Cruz's harshest critics had to admit it. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't dodged hard questions. Most unexpectedly, he hadn't collapsed under pressure. He walked into a space designed to dismantle him. And instead, he dismantled the illusion that narrative was more powerful than clarity. But the real impact didn't show up in the headlines. It showed up in living rooms. Families who had long written him off watched the clips together, rewound parts, talked about it. Not everyone agreed with him, but they talked, they debated, they listened. And isn't that what Congress, at its best, claims to want? Even former critics took to social media to acknowledge the shift. I'm no fan of Ted Cruz, but today he showed more courage on the Senate floor than I've seen in years. He said what we were all thinking and did it without venom. That's rare. For its part, the committee went quiet. No highlight reel, no behind-the-scenes interviews. Just a vague tweet thanking Cruz for an honest debate. A tweet that was ratioed within the hour. And Cruz? He returned to his usual life. No public statements, no interviews, no reaction to the viral fame. Because for once, the point wasn't to chase the spotlight. It was to say one true thing, say it clearly, and leave it behind. In an era of constant noise, one sentence had cut through. You don't tear down walls by shouting at people. You tear them down by listening, even to those you disagree with. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it stuck. He didn't win by yelling.